it's about development patterns and things like that. So part of this is selfish. I'm sort of at that part of my career where I need to start writing grant proposals and things, and hopefully working with a lot of interesting and ongoing projects and things. So largely this is kind of an overview of recent work that has started to be published and how to start thinking about the methods and approaches that I can bring to the table and how to link it to these other types of disciplines. So I'll just start with this paper that recently came out in a journal called African Invertebrates. It's sort of an opportunistic paper where we're doing some work on a sediment core collected in eastern Mao. And we came across something quite interesting in the sediment, which was the statoblast, which is a reproductive part of a freshwater bryozoa. And what we found curious is that a few years ago, or a decade or so ago, there was a WWF biodiversity survey, and they did not find any bryozoa at the site. So looking at through the historical perspective was quite curious. So the site is in western Kenya in the eastern Mao forest. And it's just a small wetland in an industrial forest. So this is just a Google Earth view of it. And this is the swamp area in here. And then there's a small drainage this way. And so it's surrounded by planted tree stands that are managed by Kenya Forest Service. So in 2014, Esther and I led a crew up there to core the swamp. So it's full of grass and Cyperaceae. The water level is quite low at the time we were there. I think it's around 30 centimeters worth of water. There wasn't very much open water at all. It was very overgrown. And we surveyed surface samples of sediment all across the swamp, and we also took a core from the center of the swamp. And we've had some radiocarbon dates collected on that, and built a preliminary age model. And so the core actually goes down about 5.5 meters, and it dates to about 16,000 years ago. So it captures that transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, and throughout the African humid period, as well as some into the recent past. And so during the investigation of this core, I was counting some charcoal, and we came across this thing. So at first I didn't know what it was. It's a chitinous, very small, 300 microns size remain, but it was readily identifiable to a single species, Lophopadella capensis. And what's really interesting about this species is that it's only found in about 6 locations currently. So primarily in South Africa, another site in Kenya, and recently in Israel, which is a curious pattern. So that's what it looks like. And so it was found in a few locations down the core. So that's the top of the core. And this is an image that Esther collected at Aberystwyth University of the core face and magnetic susceptibility values. But primarily this is the red pluses are the locations of where the fossil was found. And so it was found throughout the record intermittently. It's just presence data for the taxa. But curiously, it was in the very recent past, in the past few hundred years, but not observed today. And so I think that sort of drove the impetus for just writing a quick note on this occurrence. And I guess it fits into the sort of biodiversity aspect of what this type of data can provide insight for. So this is just another note that we recently published also. I guess throughout the time of surveying the literature in East Africa, we collected all the radiocarbon dates that were published, and we've been putting them into a database that's freely available. So it's the Canadian Archaeological Radiocarbon Database. It's a global database, although the name doesn't sound like that. And all radiocarbon databases that are available currently have a lack of data in Africa-wide. So these are the first actual African dates to be submitted to an open access database for people to use. And It's a live database, so it can be updated continuously and added to. And so if you're interested in these types of tools, it collects radiocarbon dates from archaeological sites, geologic sites like we have been working in, and also from paleontological remains as well. So that's another tool that's available if you're interested. And primarily, a lot of the ongoing work that I'm active in is looking at charcoal in these sediment records to think about fire activity in the past and start to think about how to use different metrics or maybe new approaches to link the data that we can collect to relevant ecological and conservation questions, and also thinking about human and environment interactions throughout the past. So one research question that I'd like to pursue is looking at the relationship between the morphologies of the charcoal, the different shapes that are present in the sediments, and trying to link that to the composition of the vegetation as well as the structure of it. So the arrangement, is it just grasses and trees, or trees, and the distribution of those around a site. And if that's possible to do that quantitatively, it might be possible to reconstruct the structure of the vegetation at the site through time. And that should be able to improve linkages between the type of paleo data we're able to collect and land cover modeling. So there's a quite diverse range of land cover types and structures that are seen, and these are actually just snapshots from the Amboseli area only. And you can see there's quite a diversity. And so when we collect sediment from these different locations, there's an assemblage of charcoal morphologies that are present. And so there's quite a range of different shapes that you see, and we're able to experimentally link those to different plant parts and different plant types that are present on the landscape. And if we classify those, then as we count the charcoal in a sediment core, then we're able to build those assemblages through time, just like we would do for any other microfossil. And then we get lots of squiggly lines. So this would be a sediment core with the recent at the top and the past at the bottom, and the variation in the charcoal assemblage or morphology assemblage through time. And then the ultimate goal would be to link that with land cover models, if that's possible. And so how to pursue that. And so some of the ongoing work is just collecting surface sediment samples from depositional sites across the world. And a little bit I've been looking at also soil samples from East Africa to also look at how the charcoal is preserved in there and if it does relate to the structure of the vegetation that's currently there. So once we have enough of this type of data, and it's all will be freely available through the modern global charcoal database, we hope to be able to build some quantitative links between those morphology assemblages and the structure, and to see if this is actually possible. And something that comes up in a lot of the discussions that we have, I guess, is thinking about what is still invisible with the paleo environmental data that we're able to collect, and trying to think of ways of pursuing measurement of these in some capacity to sort of strengthen the links between ecological questions as well as the modeling sphere. And just quickly, this is a few that would be quite relevant and interesting in the East African context. So certainly with pollen analyses and things like that, we're only usually able to get to Palaeoecology, the family, and that doesn't necessarily help in interpreting sediment or vegetation records in the context of conservation or vegetation structure change through time. And there are methods to actually try to pursue looking at subfamilies of grasses and things like that. So by looking at the structures that's preserved in the charcoal on burned grass types and things like that. of course, the vegetation structure, where we could try to move from pollen diagrams and charcoal diagrams into thinking about structure in some spatial way. And then also when we build these records, it's very qualitative of just more or less biomass burning if you see more or less charcoal in a record. But it would be quite interesting to sort of constrain these things and look at something like reconstructing burned area specifically, or the seasonality of fire, if that's even possible, or other aspects of the fire regime that are ecologically relevant. And of course, very high resolution sampling at the tops to start thinking about these rates of change in the recent past. And so moving forward from that is like thinking of ways of strengthening the links between paleo and archaeology and social science as well, to start putting together a more holistic story of change and recent change. And also trying to collect data in a useful way that can be then used by the modeling community. And so that's it. So these are the groups that I'm sort of been working with and where the data is and publications are available now. A couple of them are pages, activities like the Global Paleofire Working Group that manages the Global Charcoal Database and soon to be the Modern Global Charcoal Database as well. So thanks for listening.
Questions, comments? I have one. Obviously, you showed